Hello and welcome to Down to Art. I'm your host, Christy Gordon, and today I'll be talking to the amazing artist John O'Connor about how to find your voice as an artist. And I met John recently in January at the Vermont Studio Center residency, where he was the visiting artist while I was attending. And John has actually been in attendance of most of the residencies, most of the main ones. He has gone to the Vermont Studio Center before and also McDowell Colony and Skowhegan. And he's won so many awards for his work, been in so many shows. Recently, he was just named as a fellow for the Guggenheim Fellowship. So welcome, John. It's so good to have you.
Oh, thanks, Christy. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk with you.
I'm so excited to talk with you too. It's so good to see you again. So we met at the Vermont Studio Center where you were a visiting artist. And while you were there, you gave a talk where you shared a bit about a story of when you created like maybe it was the first piece that really felt meaningful and true to you. I know there was a bag of chips involved. Do you want to kind of recreate that story for us?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean that was specific to Vermont primarily in that, but I think that time was really, important for me. And I don't know. I think it probably varies for everyone depending on when they go to a place. But that residency was like I was totally, well, you were there, but then I was, really immersed in art for that, the couple weeks. Only it was only a couple weeks while I was there, but being surrounded by artists and writers, it was really like such a like an all-encompassing experience. Yeah, and so that particular piece, like I think I had been trying. I was only maybe 22, I think, or something at the time, or right around there, and sort of right out of school, trying to find what I was interested in and like what my work could be about and what it would look like. And yeah, so I had up until that point I had been kind of always painting and drawing, sort of trying to find some inspiration, either out of my head or from looking, sort of things that were that existed in the world, like representationally. But I was more interested in abstraction, and so I was sort of like, trying a lot of different ways of making paintings and drawings, and then sort of experimenting with different materials. And so there was one night, I think it was pretty late in Vermont, when I had my own studio. So it's like all you're doing is thinking about and making art all the time, which I had never done in my life. So I was there by myself and had been making a number of paintings that were kind of similar and like repeating myself, and felt like it was not like nothing interesting was happening that was new. So I was just feeling like being around all these artists was inspiring, but also really hard to deal with because everybody thought was doing such great work and they were all like doing their own thing. And I was thinking like, I don't know, maybe it's just, something that I'm doing is not working, and maybe I can't find that thing that's my own. So I had been making these paintings, and this one work, I had started, and it was sort of started in the same way another one had. It's hard without looking at it, but anyway, I had started it and then thought, well, it doesn't look good. I'm not liking it. It's the same thing I always do. So I painted over it with like white house paint, and so I thought I'll just go down to the store and get snack or something. It was like midnight, and so the walk. It's like about maybe 10 minutes walk, 15 minutes. I don't even know. Felt longer, but I walked down to the store and bought a bag of chips and some soda, and came back to my studio. And I was like sitting in front of the painting thinking, I'll just like eat and drink all this stuff, because I was sort of feeling like
Mhm.
sad but feeling down about everything looking the same, and then I'll go to bed. um and I drank the entire liter of Coke and ate the entire bag of chips, so I sort of felt like crap. But then I went up to the piece and just started sketching the same thing that was going to be probably I'd done a million times before, but something about the time that it took for that paint to sort of dry. It's again a little hard to describe, but it sort of tore into the paint, and then the pencil mark that I was using would like go on top of the surface and then go into the surface, and it felt like something kind of new. It was simple, but it felt like this thing sort of existed between a drawing and a painting. It felt like it was like a diagram in a real form at the same time. I couldn't quite articulate it, but it's what it felt like. And so I got really excited and thought, I found something new. Sorry, I'm rambling on here, but
No.
yeah. So I thought I found something new, and how do I recreate that? So I tried after that to like to try to like recreate the conditions that allowed me to make that painting. So I would like paint, the red paint the house paint over it. I actually would walk down to the store the next day, come back, try to estimate how much time it took me to do all these things, try to draw it again, never worked. I like after I left Vermont, I like set my alarm in the middle of the night. I would do these little like a science experiment. Like how do you recreate that thing? Set up a number of panels, paint them, start them, wake up, try to do it. And it's interesting. Like I remember at the time I showed like several versions of the other ones to other residents, and I was like, which, are these working? And then all like everybody was like, no, this first one's really, really great, but these aren't quite as good. And I thought, like, I can never recreate that moment where something happened sort of spontaneously without my planning, you know. And I thought, well, it was futile to try to do it, but something interesting in the process, I think that I didn't recognize was that maybe just something in my personality was like leading me to have to sort of calculate all of these conditions and try to like treat art making kind of like almost like a scientific experiment, where you test something, you have a sort of hypothesis, you try it, and then you sort of reevaluate from there. So I don't think anything came of that one work. I still thought worked well, like came out. I was excited by it, still am, even though it probably doesn't look so great now. But the process of like trying to recapture that moment was sort of what lasted, I think, more. And also the moment where this thing kind of existed in an in between state was interesting. That's a long, long answer to your story, but it ended
Oh,
involving a whole bag of chips. So yeah.
actually, that is actually really interesting because I hadn't even thought of the fact that in some ways that ties into the themes that you're still exploring now, like this kind of diagramming and mapping of what's uh, unknown or sort of spontaneous is actually still a theme that you're like exploring, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think at the time, I was really looking for what you're trying to figure out what it is that you're interested in, and what are things like other artworks. Um, so I'd be influenced by a lot of artists, of course, but then also I was always really intrigued by like little marks or diagrams, things that looked unintentionally aesthetic or implied that there was some, like if someone's doing a little calculation, like you look at like um, building a house and someone like jot down dimensions or something, and just that is not meant to look aesthetic, but there's something interesting about the way maybe the pencil looks on the surface of the wood or something. And I found that kind of that state of something being interesting to look at aesthetically, but implying that there's this external sort of source, like it's being used in a different way. Like a diagram. A diagram is planning for something, and even if you don't know exactly what the diagram is, or it's explaining something, it still can be interesting to look at as a visual form. So
Totally. And your pieces almost highlight that, I feel like. And that's interesting about like that background. Another piece of your background that kind of ties into your work, which you showed a photo of when you were doing the artist talk at the Vermont Studio Center, was the photo of your family home and all the patterns like that your mom had, like patterns on pillows, patterns on blankets. And of course, your work has like all of these beautiful patterns in it. Did you want to just talk a little bit about that and how it like background kind of influences your voice?
yeah, I guess yeah, for a long time I never thought, I kind of always thought that I don't know how, you think or whatever, or anyone that's like um interested in it, like thought that I was influenced by the artists I was looking at or being taught, but you know, my mom really like, particularly after she and my dad split, she kind of took over the house and like began to fill it with things. So yeah, the photographs you were talking about, like she had like a really particular aesthetic, but it was an overloaded kind of visual, like really intense aesthetic. And everything kind of had its own little story, like her little vignettes and places around the house. And I always thought when I was younger that it was not something I was like, I didn't not like it, but I just thought that's the way she was. and I never really thought of it related to what I did until years later. And then I thought, well, actually, unintentionally, it's just sort of part of it's probably her, something of her, yeah, it's just her getting kind of like passed on to me. So I feel like my aesthetic is really probably comes a lot from hers. Maybe being influenced by that, maybe just something because we're related. But I really came to kind of look more closely and appreciate what she did, and thought that actually, obviously there's a lot of really important art influences that affect what you're doing, and looking at art is incredibly important. But those things, like how would she arrange something, which we wouldn't consider fine art in a certain way, but it was so, I thought, just so great, and like her own vision. And I was like, well, I really need to pay attention to what she's doing. And so it wasn't intentional, but it was like I think her kind of aesthetic and pattern, color in a really like intense sort of like cumulative aesthetic is just something that rubbed off on me, or is just like innate in the way I think. And so I super appreciate it now, Didn't
Yeah.
as a teenager because the house was like stuff, but now I do. So
Oh, I loved that photo and I love the patterns in your work. So your
thanks.
work has obviously become really crystallized now, and I'm not sure like how long, probably a long time, but do you remember when you kind of feel like you found your voice? Like how did you know you had found your voice?
Yeah, I kind of feel like I do. No, exactly. I think I was
Really?
like 30 years old. Yeah. So I was pretty old, but yeah, I remember, well, at least, obviously things changed, but something clicked where it felt like the work was mine at a certain point. I felt for years that it was very derivative, like like I told you in Vermont, like there's moments where things would feel like I could get at what I was like interested in, but very often it felt like I was copying other people and sort of like working in the way they were working, to the point where it was really hard to feel like I could, yeah, that I just felt like maybe I couldn't find my own voice, like I couldn't find my own way of working. So after graduates, I went to graduate school at Pratt, and I was really like influenced by the people that were there, like the faculty. So, but there was like a bit more of a kind of formalist, abstraction, like an aesthetic that was not pushed by everyone, but it was sort of, in the history of the faculty, I thought, which I was interested in, and it affected my way of thinking, really in big ways. But after that, I went to Skowhegan for that summer after, and that's a residency in Maine, and felt like I was around artists and other like resident artists that were doing things that were so different, like all over the place. No particular like hierarchy, it didn't seem, like there weren't painters, weren't, sort of like the main, like I was sort of like, just like everybody else was like, everybody was doing such diverse things. Anyway, I don't really, and ideas in the work were so all over the place. So that summer I felt like I really started to kind of experiment with ideas outside of purely formal art making ideas. And then when I left there, yeah, what it was, my now partner and I got rented a 2 bedroom apartment in Queens, and I used the second bedroom, which was a super tiny bedroom, as my studio. And it was like a couple of years where there was nobody came to the studio. Like I was kind of just in there by myself, working, teaching still, but starting to teach anyway. And it was during that time that I felt like the sort of conceptual things that I was experimenting with that were like began at Pratt but moved through Skowhegan, and then they sort of developed and became a little bit more like I became excited about sort of following a particular path, but also aesthetically I felt like, um the kind of like you talked about sort of the patterning, the kind of like space between like a note taking or diagramming and a kind of clear, hard edged, like resolved image or pattern or form. It just sort of clicked. And there was one drawing in particular that I did. I remember thinking, it was like testing. It was like about memory, and it was like a drawing where I sort of tested my own memory, in the drawing. So the process was like the drawing was like a surface on which I could actually do a process. Like try something and it would be like an actual real thing happening. But then I went back in and kind of like drew and resolved it into a visual form. And so it kind of fused those two. And I thought at the time, I thought, okay, this feels like my own thing, you know, like it is influenced by a lot of things, and I can see you can see like the people that you're looking at and everything, but it felt like this is my own language, and for better or worse, it's good. I'm going to follow it, you know, because it feels exciting to me, you know. That's your
Yeah.
question, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's like really interesting how like yeah, you still could see all of the influences all coming together in this way that because I actually think I wonder what you think about that too. I feel like yeah, looking at art is like really important and I know maybe a long time ago and I know lots of maybe early on artists want to be so original that they're like, oh no, it all comes from me. I'm not looking at anyone else or you
Yeah.
know, but I think as we like kind of develop as artists, we like, you know, really like obviously love to look at other art and it's like an integral part of our process. And it does somehow all start to come together in this way, just like you talked about, where all of the influences are in there, but it still feels totally uniquely us. But what do you think is the kind of importance of the role of like looking at other art in your work and in your development?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like particularly when I was, you know, starting out, like art was like a whole new language, you know. I remember taking art history in college, and having never seen abstraction in my life. Like I didn't know why anyone would make an abstract painting, you know, like what's the purpose of it? But it was just like super interesting to me because it felt like a totally new language, you know, like felt like something I didn't understand. And so I was curious to try to make it myself, you know. And I continue, like I still, you know, you want to understand the sort of context around which you make things. You get, you know, you can get sort of inspired by other artists. Um, I would also sort of try to recreate things that I found, you know, if like I remember seeing a Surratt show of drawings and thinking I didn't understand how he could make these edges between like something that felt like it was lit, you know, like it was the edge of a figure or a form, and then it dissolved into the background. And that moment where it transitioned felt like I couldn't understand it, but I loved it, you know. So I try to copy those. Like I would go home and try to like do it myself. And also the sort of hard edged aesthetic of like the my colored pencil. I worked at the Brooklyn Museum for like a semester when I was at Pratt, and I remember seeing a work of art that was a very small graphite drawing. It was like solid graphite. It was in a flat file, I think. And I had no idea what it was made of at first. And I looked more closely and realized it was graphite. And I thought, wow, I had no idea that a material like that could look that way. So I went home and tried to do it. And then didn't know didn't like use it in anything at that time. But then started to like after like that time I talked about in my apartment, I started to kind of use color pencil and graphite in that solid way. And it made those patterns like they were very slow and kind of, you know, they were like labor intensive, but they were really packed and tight and solid and flat. And I thought, wow, that's actually sort of synthesizing that moment where, you know, I couldn't quite understand how Seurat got his edge, where it was between like one thing and another, which was sort of between a diagram and a form. I felt like was kind of comparable, but also that sort of understanding like how to just use a material in a way I hadn't thought you could use. I would, yeah, I would copy a lot of things too. I remember in undergrad, I had a teacher that didn't really teach a lot, but he would just make his own artwork in class, and I would really like watch how he worked, and I felt like I was kind of working like him in a funny way. And even in high school for years, like I got in trouble for copying a work of art. Um, yeah, I was doing like it was like we had to do some project in pastels, and I hadn't really used pastels my entire life, but my mother had given me a how to draw pastels book, and so I got the pastels out and I drew like this. It was like some Italian villa in like a kind of a hatched style, and I copied it like the step by step thing. And I remember like I was a really quiet kid and bringing the drawing into class, and then the teacher was like immediately was like John, this is like so great, and I at the time didn't say anything about it because I was like, I was so proud that I had done it. And then it became like the best drawing in that group. And then it was like when I was a senior, so I remember just someone was like, did you copy that pastel? Felt so guilty about it. And I said, yeah. And they said the new art teacher saw it in a book and you never, so they like it became like a thing at the school where like I had to own up to it, which I explained why I did it, and I said I just didn't know how to do it, and I tried to. I felt great that my drawing was being treated as the best drawing, and but for years, like that moment, like even in Vermont, I'd be like, I'm just that person that has to do the stuff like that drawing. Like I can't find the thing that is my own, you know. Um, anyway, it's just interesting that I think so. For me, it was like really taking little bits and pieces from all these different artists and stuff, and either trying to do it in my own way and then synthesizing it into your own. Eventually, comes into your own thinking, but something about the way someone makes something may be interesting to you, and you just build on that.
Oh man, I love that.
I
That's
think I'm totally
so
rambling on
true.
here, so you just tell me to stop.
No, this is like brilliant. Like I'm so glad you mentioned that idea of you're kind of coming to understand a language, like because like
Yeah.
it's a whole nother language, and that when we do copies, we kind of learn how to embody that language. Like, yeah, I recently did a copy of a painting way outside of my realm of training because I
Mhm.
like was looking at it was a copy of Tibetan Mahakala
Oh,
painting,
wow.
and
Huh.
it's like so beautiful, and it was like so different from my training, so different I couldn't even understand it, like, and even as I was doing it, it was just blowing my mind. But by
Wow.
copying it, it would sort of
Yeah.
bring it into my repertoire, and just like you say, then bits and pieces from all these different things that are now within you might sort of form
Yeah.
your voice and your style, and it'll
Why
be
were you
like
working from
unique or
that?
whatever.
Oh, sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was doing it at the Met. They have like a copyist program at the Met, so I was actually right in front of the
Oh,
Mahakala painting,
wow.
in the Met. Yeah, it was amazing.
That's really
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. So you still
yeah.
still do that as part of your practice then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I especially like doing it when it's something that's like outside of my realm of training, like because it just
Mhm.
blows my mind. Even sometimes making a sharp edge with black, like blows my mind. Like you
That's
don't
funny.
do that
Yeah.
in my training, So it's
Yeah.
so visually exciting. I'm like kind of it's like
Yeah.
exciting to me.
And
Um,
in your training, you worked a lot from artists as well, or how? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it was more of a kind of, well, it was like combining representational techniques with our kind of own voice a little bit.
Mhm.
But a lot of it was like representational, like trainings. So,
Yeah.
and that used to like totally enamor me, but now I feel like I've got that. So these things that are outside of that are just like mind boggling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
But it's so cool to hear about how that like works for you. And then also I saw this video on YouTube where you were talking about these self-avoiding walks. Well, actually it was the show Self-Avoiding Walks, and you were talking about how you created some of the pieces and you actually closed your eyes at first and kind of scribbled out, was it names or something like that? And then you kind of went in on top of that, bringing in your technique and your craft and all the things, elements that you wanted to bring into the design. And I just thought that was really interesting, this kind of bridging of like intuition or flow, and then bringing
Mhm.
in like technical sort of like theory and stuff. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. That kind of I think it goes back to the first thing about Vermont actually was that eventually I tried to find ways to sort of like systematize getting out of my own head, like doing something different. So one way would be, yeah, maybe like a free, well, I'm trying to think which drawing I was referencing in that video, but I have used some techniques in particular pieces where I'll like close my eyes and either try to sort of think of something and draw it, or just, yeah, usually I'm sort of focusing on an idea or an image or something, but letting the kind of slippage that happens when you're not able to sort of translate, the line into that stuff that does something that's unexpected, and then to react to it is key. And a lot of like my work developed, I'm not really able to think too many steps in advance. So I don't really like, I don't know if I don't like to, or I'm just not great at it. I'm not a good planner in general. So maybe that's part of it. But a lot of what I do is like I have a kind of initial idea and I'll make something and then I'll try to respond to it and then make something again. And it sort of takes like that process from Vermont of like, multiple iterations of an idea, but spread out over a number of pieces. It sort of collapses them. So I might start with a really loose drawing and then fill something in or erase a part and then think, well, what else would happen? What would be, what would happen next? And also the fact that my drawings take a while to make, the other things can enter into the process, so things I'll see and be interested in, maybe, or, an idea that I'll, kind of like discover that maybe I could integrate into the work. So allowing it to kind of develop incrementally is kind of key to what I make. But then in terms of that, yeah, I think that I'm not sure exactly if again what piece that was, but the process of kind of maybe I'm losing track of what I was saying now.
Actually, I think this is like totally brilliant. I love what you said about how it like as you're kind of giving time for the piece to evolve, like so maybe you start a little bit more intuitively, and then as you're giving time for the piece to evolve, it starts to almost not reveal itself to you, but a little bit, and then different things from life are like coming in. And
Yeah,
I think a lot of us, like, I don't know, I even hear with writers that sort of process where the thing starts to take on a life of its own and
yeah,
and you only know each like one step at a time. So of course I would get like totally overwhelmed if I was like trying to plan out the whole thing. It would be impossible, but I might know the next step or whatever,
yeah,
and then I might gain some inspiration even
yeah,
from a trip to a museum or whatever and be like, and that makes all the difference. And then yeah,
yeah.
I just love what you said, like layering it on in that way. I think that's like so exactly how, like, yeah, how
And
it
I
is.
think if you get too concerned, and I know you're interested, like the interested in the sort of voice. If I get too like I'm like I need to make something really good, or I need this thing worked really well. So this goes back to the first. So I need to, and it happens still. I'll be like, I need to make that same thing again. But then it's like incredibly boring, and it's probably impossible to redo it again. Um, but so then the incrementalism is what's sort of like exciting to me because it's step by step. So I could start it, but then you have to introduce something new, which is the exciting part of making a piece that there's always a risk that it doesn't work out potentially, but you can, by moving piece, step by step, you're able to kind of react, change, and then yeah, I noted I feel like if I'm out of the studio for a while or I'm feeling like something really worked well and I thought, oh, that's a great I need to be able to like get back into that. That's the worst way to think. So I'll avoid that and try to like shift in some way to get out of my head. Oh yeah, so the
Totally.
systematizing thing I was mentioning that's one thing
Yep.
I was
Yeah.
just finding like for me getting out of my head and getting like stop not repeating patterns or finding something that would be new and exciting to react to became difficult just intuitively. So I would, and it started when I discovered John Cage's work, who we use chants. So I would like I took a little bit of what he did and sort of systematized the decision making in the work, at least at the outset. So maybe a grid, and I would, randomly pull numbers and be like, okay, I have to start using this square, this square, and this square. And it forces you to have to, it's like an assignment or something. So you give yourself, it forces you to have to work outside of what you're used to. And then from Skowhegan and into what I do now, pulling from external like information, whether it's language or data or systems, allows me to tap into that sort of idea. So if I'm looking at the weather forecast, you have like a certain set of information, you have the numbers, you have the color, you have those things. And then how you and maybe how I would employ those would be, I'd find a way to kind of do that would be different than my intuitive like way of progressing would be.
Ooh,
Yeah. So
that's
systematizing
neat.
it was like really key for me. Like, and that was like, it was a real slow process to figure out how to do it. Uh, and I did it through chance at first when I was at Pratt, and that was all John Cage based, like randomly pulling numbers and it was interesting, but it got kind of I felt like even then I was repeating it myself and it got kind of boring. I was like, okay, this is about chance, but it's still like it's about the look, the aesthetic more than it was the external idea. So then I did do a piece about like the weather forecast, and then like I think I maybe even showed one. I'm not sure about like memory loss from a relative that I had. That sort of inspired this drawing. Then the kind of information I was pulling from that I could then turn into a system was derived from those sources, and that became like it was like okay, I was kind of working, talking to that sort of that idea in a way, not exclusively like self-contained, but it was like okay, you're talking about the need for us to predict the weather or something like that, or understanding why our memory changes or it gets, so it sort of becomes like a conversation with that idea.
Ooh, that's really cool. I like that about it being like a conversation. I feel like for some people they just find their voice naturally, but for me I didn't, so I had to get a little bit obsessed about it and figure this thing out.
Yeah. Well, I like
Yeah.
your technique. And I also remember my friend Dawn Clemens, she said that she would tell her students to just make sure like treat art making like it's a habit. Like how much time do you
Yes.
spend brushing your teeth? Do at least
Yeah.
do a little bit, like 5 minutes just to do something with it each day. And
Yeah.
so I made this class, 1001 Drawings, it's called, which is like this idea that it's sort of exactly what I do. So it's sort of kind of funny, but we they do 1,000 drawings over the course of the semester. So really fast, regular, close to 50 to 100 a week, where it's like different ideas, different materials, really experiment, but nothing's precious. And then they have
Yeah.
one large scale drawing that they develop over the course of the whole semester. So it's very
Oh.
like I do. It's like very slow,
Yep.
cumulative, and then these things are happening really quickly, and like they're like flashes, and that's a really like meditative process. And I never offered it until I got tenure because I thought no one's going to take this class because it sounds like so many drawings, but the kids are like super into it. I
Whoa.
was really surprised. Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
one of the most like enrolled classes at the college. So I was like, how is that even possible? I thought if I
Wow.
offered before tenure and no one takes it, I'll get fired. But I was like, so as soon as I got tenure, I was like 1,001. Let's do it. And yeah, and I think I'm going to do a class, something along the lines of like, one drawing, like one thing that we work on for the entire semester. So could
Yeah.
sound incredibly boring, but through that, like I think it addresses what you're talking about. Like how do you find something in that, like looking at something for a prolonged period of time, and how does your looking change? The thing may change, but your way of seeing it also changes as well. So
That's like so true. Yeah, you let like epiphanies enter the work as you
yeah,
kind of give it time.
yeah,
Yeah. And well, recently you've had a very exciting piece of success. You just got named as one of the Guggenheim Fellows. I don't know if it's like top secret or anything. I don't know how these things work, but can you talk about like what the project is that you're gonna be working on and stuff like that?
yeah. So you propose like you have to propose a project for the duration of it, and so it kind of builds off the idea of those random walks, like that the title of the show was about. So I proposed like I'm interested in that, like so random walks and a kind of like a way of mathematically sort of predicting the future is interesting to me, and in that this kind of random walk is based more or less on like how one step at a time could be random, but eventually this thing, this sort of movement could be sort of predictable and could actually, if you're walking on a flat surface, you're kind of eventually will cross the same your path in a certain way. So there's a way of predicting the future, through an incremental step by step sort of mathematical way. But I'm also really interested in like how people future predictions and any other ways. So we're just talking about the weather, like just trying to predict the weather is interesting, but also historically people that are attempting to predict way off into the future, and how someone may like what I'm really intrigued by is like how do you get a sense of what the future would be like, and how do you then translate that into language which gets communicated to other people. And so I've been collecting books of like predictions of the future. There are like all different types, and then using the language to kind of like almost like a recipe to take the language and reincarnate it and like turn it back into a visual form, imagining that like Nostradamus or someone was like had a vision of something and then had to like put it into words. And how do I take those words and sort of recreate it into a form that, you could imagine would look like this vision of the future, even if it's like totally incorrect, which is also kind of intriguing to me too, because it's like futile to try to do that in many ways. So the plan was to kind of make a set of like 9 large scale drawings that dealt with the intersection between the like sort of mathematical ability to predict an incremental future movement, and then this sort of intersection between that and like these sort of more broad linguistic predictions of the future. And so that was like my idea, and I want to try to put a book together with those. But who knows where it'll go, So that's just the general idea. But
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I was like so
good.
excited for you to see.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so like this is like a really big deal. What's like sort of happened? I don't know what happens after you. Like, is everything exploding in your art career now?
No, no, no. It's no, that would be great if things would take off. I mean, it's been great. It's yeah, I don't know. It's like I mean, I'd applied a bunch of times in the past,
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean,
yeah,
I
so
have, of
it's
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
so who knows why it works out. I did rewrite the statement and the prep plan based on a friend of mine. I don't know if like anybody is interested in practical advice, but
Oh, we are.
I had a statement and a plan that I had used for like
Nice.
used and reused for years, but
Oh, nice.
I don't know if it helped, but so one of my friends who got it like a couple years ago, she offered to review it. So I was like, okay,
Oh.
So she gave me some feedback, and so I was like, okay, I need to just sit down and rewrite it. But I don't enjoy writing those things. But it took a couple days, maybe longer, just to totally rewrite it and be clearer about what it was, because I hadn't
Yeah.
really thought. So it was like concrete and specific. Of course, like I feel like things may diverge from that, but they just kind of. I think it did help in writing it to kind of give me a sense of where I could imagine a series of works going. But anyway, so no, I mean, in terms of like art career, I get it. It's interesting and I've been in some things happening, but more yeah, I don't know. I think we'll just see what happens in the future when I'm able to make more work and hopefully take a little time from school too. But um, yeah, it was just really great to have that, and I really felt lucky to get it. But I had applied a bunch of times, so I feel like anybody just with all these things just apply, and I think it probably just depends on who's on the jury. I don't know really why or how it works out, but yeah,
Well, I'm sure it's because your work is so amazing and your proposal is so excellent. But I think that is such a good like point though. Yeah, we have to just keep applying, like not worry about the rejections, just keep applying over and over because sometimes
yeah,
it works out. Yeah.
yeah. And I know I've had friends that got them when they were really young, like
Wow.
when I was like they were like not really young, like but like in much younger than I am. And one of my friends, I remember she got it. She was like, I don't know, she was probably around 50 or something. She's like, you don't want to get it when you're too young because then you have nothing left to get. I was like, huh.
That's
Well, what if you
true.
never get it? So
But you did.
but I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I was like, that's you're assuming you're going to get it eventually. But yeah, it's great. So I was excited to get it. So thanks. But I don't know. We'll see. Like, I feel like it's interesting. We'll just, yeah, yeah, done a few different types of shows this year. It feels like it's kind of like a transition in some ways. Like, my son's older now. Teaching is kind of settled a little bit, still busy, but feel like I'm able to sort of pursue things a little more intensely, than recently.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it'll translate in other things too.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can like totally see that. Yeah, it seems like you're just in one show after the other ever since I like actually that's the actual case. Ever since I met you, you've been in one show after
Oh,
another this year.
oh,
So
yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
looks like things are going really well. Yeah,
Yeah, it's cool, and it's been with a lot of friends and things too. So I've been, yeah, it's been a fun, interesting year. So
totally.
see what happens
Yeah.
next. But
Yeah.
anyway, So
Oh, well, I
I'm
can't
not
wait
giving you
to
much
see
about
it.
the Guggenheim. I don't really know how it'll
Oh no,
turn.
this was better. That was exactly what I
Yeah.
wanted.
Okay.
The practical advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything
Yeah,
like that. It's useful. So.
totally. Oh, well, it's so good chatting with you, John, and I just really appreciate it so much. And it's always good to see you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Christy. And I love your work. Love what you're doing, and it's really great to talk with you. I'm glad we connected in Vermont, and hope we'll continue to talk. And so, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, John, and talk to
Thanks,
you
Christy.
soon.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Down to Art. To find out more about John and his work, visit his website at johnjoconnor.net or check out his Instagram at JJAYOSEA, and I'll include a link to that in the description. Also, registration is currently open for my Visionary Artist Master Program, VAMP, and you can learn more about it by clicking the link in the description for that too.